Heading towards Cradle Mountain, the weather takes a turn for the worse. Regardless, the team still want to visit some of the historic trapping huts in the area to get a feel for the living conditions experienced by the early pioneers and tiger hunters. The vehicles can only go so far, so the team sets out for a long walk in the rain.
Is that right? Yeah, pretty good.
Before we start filming, Chris gets me to randomly jump into puddles so that I then walk around the rest of the day with wet socks and wet shoes. So he then starts sniggering to himself all day. So I keep falling for it. I don't know why.
Every time.
Every time. Hurry up, Lionel.
Yeah. So this is our best boy. I don't remember his name. Lionel and Larry. Loretta, something like that. For a best boy, is actually a reasonable DOP. But, yeah.
What's DOP stand for again?
The director of princesses will handle it. It only took 5 minutes for a witty reason, but yeah.
You can just see in the distance the transmission lines. So obviously they get inspected from time to time. People actually have to physically drive along the easements. And over the years there's been a number of thylacine sightings that happen when those workmen are out actually doing that. Of course you also have vegetation that's cleared around that space, so you'll get the prey species that are coming in and potentially your marsupial carnivores coming in to look for them. The other interesting thing about power line easements is that apparently Sasquatch follow them in North America, so let's be on the lookout for a Sasquatch.
Yeah, we had this conversation, that's how they power
They're portals.
Interdimensional travel.
Yeah.
Using the static electricity from our power lines.
They actually, some conspiracy theorists believe that they come and pick up thylacines as well.
It would make sense why there's no thylacines.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a Facebook group that covers that.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go.
So, Larry, Lionel, acts as our literary device. Lionel is like the Dr. Watson of the TRU. We just pretend he's a dumb and tell him all this shit that he actually knows. It's like a literary device. Yeah.
Hashtag scientist.
Hashtag scientist. This is Charleston's hut near the Vale of Belvoir and Lake Lee in the sort of northern central highlands of Tasmania. This is a famous area and there's been a hut here since about the 1860s. This started as a skinning shed and then it was sort of a stable for pigs, and a bloke by the name of George Williams even had a cheese factory on site in the area. And ultimately he used to take the sort of byproduct of cheese making, slap it in these troughs here and feed it to his pigs. and he was known as a bit of a tiger whisperer, a thylacine whisperer, and they came in from the surrounding areas, and one was known to feed next to the pigs in these troughs. He captured that animal and he took it to the Launceston Zoo, and it lived out the rest of its days on display at the Launceston Zoo, which is now City Park in the middle of the city. This area today still remains a hotspot for thylacine sightings, and it's perfect habitat for that animal. So there's been a hut at this site from the 1800s. This is not the original hut. The skinning shed where the pigs were is a much earlier vintage than the hut itself. It's been rebuilt several times in history, but it's still quite a spectacular area.
Hello, anyone in there?
Chris, we've come to Yakandanda Hut.
Yep.
It's got a great history in this area. What can you tell us about it?
Well, Yakandanda Hut is also known as Sunshine Hut. There's a little bit of debate on actually what this hut is called. There's even some debate on whether what we see here is original, but the general consensus is that the hut, the frame is, and then this iron internal cladding's been put on by someone at a later date. It's Trapper Snarer's hut.
Yep.
It was set up by George Williams, who sort of owned the Charleston's hut that we just went and had a look at.
Yep.
And ultimately you used to come up here and winter up here for months on end, trapping, snaring, and ultimately take those skins back to Deloraine,
Yep.
sell them. I mean, during those days, they were pulling millions of wallaby possum out of these areas. And just between 23 and 28, 4.5 million
Wow.
ringtail possums and paddymmelon skins were paid for. A tremendous industry in this area at this time, and some of the conservation issues we've got in Tasmania with certain species relate back to that era where they were just indiscriminately pulling millions of prey animals out.
Certainly the ringtail possum is not as common now as it was then.
So it was referred to historically as common ringtail possum. That's certainly not a common species now. And there's a lot of debate in this area that those snarers actually changed the ecology. So this was ringtail possum habitat historically. Now it's realistically brushtail possums, and they've sort of colonised because they've sort of breed at a greater rate. They're far more opportunistic, so they've been responsible for sort of changing the ecology. Devils received a really bad name in that day and age because they'd come in and eat those game animals out of the snares.
Yep.
And so ultimately devils were killed to save the snaring fur industry. And so by that stage devils were very, very uncommon in the area, and people were trying to capture thylacine because they were worth up to £5 per animal. So it's just an area where everyone went back to the bush and ultimately sort of made their living off the land, true bushmen.
And I see that this hut, like many huts, has got a logbook here, and there's recent visits by ancestors of the original landholders here. Yeah,
which is extraordinary. That's Tasmania all over. Everyone's related to everyone. There'd be hundreds of relatives of George Williams just in this local area.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this hut is now on Parks land, and the Charleston's hut's now on Tasmanian Land Conservancy land. So they eventually sold that property to the conservation organisation, Tasmanian Land Conservancy. So to my knowledge, the Charlestons don't own it anymore, but they may sort of maintain a cultural right to utilise it.
Yeah, certainly great history of the area. So is it time to move on from here, Chris?
Before we do, mate, I just want to head in next door and check out the drying room. Any thylacines that were caught, snared and skinned would have been nailed to the wall in there. So it's well worth a look to see if there's any artefacts or just soak in the history at least.
Absolutely, good idea, let's go. Chris, we're in the skinning compartment of the hut. This is the place that they would have brought, potentially actually skin the animals and then put them up to dry?
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine back in the day there was probably like some sort of vat, because they would have had to have tanned the skins, or maybe they dried them and then took them to a factory. I'm not sure what the actual process was at that point, but they would have been racks, and there would have been sort of potentially skins nailed to the wall, stretchers. It would have been just knee deep in sort of skins of native animals. Yeah. There was obviously a fire in there at some point because there's a flue. These days it's just used as a bit of a woodshed for everyone passing through and that might camp in the area, but this would have had real significance back in the day. This hut would have prevented George from freezing to death, giving him a base to work from and store his skins that would have fed himself and his family for the next 12 months.
Well, and I think in the process of what I sort of know about it is nothing goes to waste. They trap the animal, they eat the meat from it. They even use the brains to actually tan the animal. And I think the saying is from tanners that every animal's got enough brain material to tan their own hide.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would have been tough. I mean, we've got quality equipment on, our car's like 500 metres away. I mean, ultimately, it's tough enough just standing here trying to get some footage. Imagine living out here for months on end.
Yeah, knee deep in snow, and there's no sort of safe place to go back to, really, is there?
There's a hut just down the road, and a husband and wife had it, and the husband died unexpectedly, and she used to walk from here all the way down to Post Office Tree just to have a conversation with the mailman.
Wow.
It's like 20 odd kilometres away, so once a week she'd walk down there, get the mail, get some supplies, and that Post Office Tree was just a ration tree that they could shove stuff in as a locker, but she'd specifically walk down there just to have a conversation with the postman. And when her husband died, she sort of eventually couldn't make ends meet, so she packed up and took herself and her kids to Waratah and remarried.
Yeah.
So some sort of tragedy in this area too.
Great history. Now, Chris, you're a hashtag scientist, as we like to say.
Hashtag scientist.
What do you think about some sort of environmental DNA analysis of all of the structures, the dirt, the timbers out of here?
Yeah.
Would it be possible to do something like that to find evidence of thylacine in here?
I think it's certainly coming. At this point, probably not. You'd have to have an artefact, but in the next few years, something like environmental DNA is going to be really important to what we do, sort of trying to study an extinct species, to be able to sort of take a soil sample from here and analyse it and determine all the genetic material from all the known sort of sequenced genomes, and determine that there's possum DNA and wombat and wallaby and thylacine DNA. It's going to be remarkable, and it's going to be a real useful tool.
Absolutely.
So our favourite man, Mohawk Dr. Todd Dissidell, he's a real sort of passionate advocate for environmental DNA, so it's going to be a real useful tool.
Certainly be able to really prove that linkage between thylacines past and where we are today.
Yep. So just remember, this is a hut.
Yep.
There would be tens, if not hundreds of these scattered through this area that we've been in the last couple of days, from here to Waratah and then back through to sort of Marweena, Wilmot, Sheffield. And then you go to Sheffield and there is, it's a second-hand shop now, but back in the day, that was where they bought and sold skins.
Yeah.
So these guys would have spent months up here and then headed down. They often spent winter up here, to my understanding, because the coats were thicker and more higher value.
Well, and I think the other thing we've got to put into context here is that these people were out after the ringtail possums and the paddymellons and the wallabies, but thylacines weren't immune to stepping in snare traps.
Absolutely.
And
you've got to be pretty cautious not to give thylacine supernatural ability. There's plenty of cases where thylacine blundered into things, or like when we were down at Charleston, it regularly came in and ate sort of slops and things from a pig trough. They weren't a supernatural beast, they were another animal trying to etch a living, and a topwater predator of that, in a real harsh and marginal environment. I don't imagine they were particularly difficult to capture in the day, just quite rare. Yeah. And so the observation of one, or the actual ability to catch one, only came upon sort of now and again, but at anything up to sort of 5 pounds per pelt, I imagine people have in the back of their mind, there's a thylacine, get the gun.
Yeah, and you're certainly not going to look at the gift horse in the mouth either, in terms of if it's caught even alive in the trap, you're going to be thinking about selling that animal.
Like the one at Charleston's hut, 150 pounds. I believe he received sort of from a wildlife trader, zoo trader in Launceston. So, I mean, 150 pounds, imagine how long he would have had to have worked to earn 150 pounds.
Yeah.
It'd be like, here's a key to a brand new Commodore.
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Maybe if it was a Ford.
Good point.
But while we're talking about, I guess, the different types of animals and the different trophic levels, we'd expect that there is that pyramid in terms of with an apex predator, that what would be the ratio to, say, the number of thylacines in this area to the number of devils?
It's a good point. They tend to suggest it's a 10-to-1 ratio. So for every one topwater predator, you have 10 opportunistic predators. So 1 thylacine, 10 devil, 10 eastern quoll, or maybe even 100 eastern quoll, depending on what niche you think that animal fulfills. So you probably need 1,000 paddy for every 1 thylacine and stuff like that. So, and then you need sort of 1 million hectares to support your population. There's sort of a 10-to-1 jump.
Certainly, I guess the thylacine in this area would have been in the back of the mind of the people that were living here at the time.
Absolutely, and that's an important point you bring up, because they do talk about the idea of the carrying capacity of Tasmania being like 5,000 thylacine. At that 10-to-1 ratio, that means 50,000 Tasmanian devil. Actually, they sort of tend to suggest that devil numbers at that point were about 100,000. So that 5,000 could be a little low. Was that the sort of barest minimum population rather than the carrying capacity? So on sort of 50,000 devils, yes, it's correct. On 100,000 devils, you'd have to suggest that it's probably 10,000 thylacines over the 68,000 square kilometres of Tasmania.
Yeah, well, it's still not a lot of animals given the type of country.
And I mean, Tasmania, 68,000 square k, that's twice the size of Switzerland. And for my North American friends, that's the Carolinas put together. I mean, there are stations in Western Australia 3 times bigger than Tasmania, but on a world stage, 68,000 square kilometres is a fair patch of earth. And even 10,000 animals spread out over that island is quite sparse.
Yeah.
But I still believe with devils that are very vulnerable to sort of becoming extinct to devil facial tumor disease, there's maybe 15 to 20,000 devils. So, I mean, they're in their vulnerable stage are still potentially more common than what the thylacine was at its peak.
And that's something that sort of intrigues me, Chris, in terms of you work with Tasmanian devils every day. You're out in the field at times putting cameras out just for your devil research. How frequently would you see a Tasmanian devil in the wild?
Right. Take the research component of what I do. Like, I see devils every day of my life. But if you took the research component and the husbandry component out of what I do and just sort of bring in my motorcycle riding, photography, what we do, 1 a year, something like that. We just be strolling along, bam, there's a devil. That would happen maybe once per year. Like, we've had cameras through this area as part of what we do. I do some research for my professional life on devils in this area, and we've had cameras in through here for years, and you'll see that there's quite a dense population of devil. You just don't observe them because they're so elusive.
So if you think back to our point about the trophic levels, if there's one thylacine for every 10 devils in an optimal sort of setting, that would be saying you're going to see one thylacine every 10 years if all of the circumstances line up, and that's if they were at the carrying capacity.
Absolutely, and that goes back to what a lot of the writing suggests from the day. They were very elusive. People just didn't stumble across thylacine. You'd have to be sort of a resident in this area, and they'd have to habituate a little bit to the idea that you were here. In the Charleston's hut case, that there was free food availability and things like. I don't think you'd just walk along, boom, 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 out for a Sunday picnic and bam, there's a family of thylacines or something.
Yeah, just not going to happen.
No, there's just too harsh an environment. Just need too big a range to get enough prey to support a thylacine, but then a thylacine needs a mate. And you need this sort of what we call an effective population. For Tasmanian devils statewide, they believe that effective number is about 10,000, not 2. So if you had 2 Tasmanian devils left and you mated them together, they have 3 young a year, there's 5, but who are you going to make the 3 offspring to? Because suddenly everyone in that pool is related to the 2 founders. The population's it's not functionally extinct, it is extinct at that point. So they sort of tend to suggest that below 10,000 devils, the species could end up functionally extinct and spiral out of control. And functional extinction, there's a lot of debate and sort of toing and froing on the Facebook groups, but it is a really, really important biological concept. You can't recover an animal from zero. You need a viable population. And what was the viable population of thylacine? You'd have to say it was like hundreds, if not thousands, not 2.
And I think one of the things you're talking about sort of Facebook groups is people often describe the thylacine as being functionally extinct, but if it was functionally extinct, you'd still have confirmed sightings. Their numbers would just be perilously low.
You'd have a remnant population, and sort of often you can put enough cameras out for long enough and prove that there are remnant populations of Amur tigers or Amur leopards and things like that. The Arabian Peninsula leopard and things like incredibly rare, but there's sort of, with enough technology out for long enough, you can prove that there is a remnant population. It happened again a couple of weeks ago. There's some debate about the Highland, Papua New Guinean Highland dog, but they've got hundreds of clear, high-res photos and video of that family group that hadn't been seen supposedly for 100 years. So if you put the hard yards in with the technology, you'd be able to show that the remnant population still exists. But in Australian law, if that population's functionally extinct for 50 years and can't categorically be proved that it's still there, it's declared extinct.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with thylacine.
And a reasonable scientific position.
Absolutely, I don't argue that at all. You can't carry on forever. Sort of animals get different quote-unquote benefits, like sometimes it's the best thing that can ever happen to an animal population from a scientific resource and research perspective to have it declared endangered. From there, you've got to have federal recovery programs and federal funding to support, and you've got to answer, and then the IUCN steps in and they might declare it endangered, and they're an international body overlooking conservation. It can't carry on forever. So 50 years to the day, an animal ends up extinct if it can't categorically be shown to still exist.
Yep.
So even if you or I or what's his name? Lionel? Larry discovered a thylacine this afternoon, it'd still be a functionally extinct population because one is not viability.
Yeah.
But it would set the world alight for sure.
Well, at least it would move from extinct to functionally extinct.
Which would be a worldwide sort of moment.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're not going to find it standing in here talking about hashtag science all day.
Hashtag science is at the basis of what we do. Without the science, you might as well be looking for portholes and Bigfoot.
Yeah, look, I think, and it's a really good point that you make. I think every moment that we actually spend doing proper research in terms of whether that's in books, talking to people who know what they're talking about, is more effective time that you end up spending in the field because you're looking in the right places rather than going off on some fool's errand. And
I pay you out relentlessly over it, but it comes down to your Triple H.
Yep.
It's like you got to know where to look. It's a big island, and you got to narrow down. And this area's got a lot of sort of historic significance and sightings. It's got a lot of modern sightings, and we should probably get out there and brave the elements and check out some of those areas.
Let's do it, mate. After you.
With the weather getting worse, the team takes the opportunity to visit the Cradle Mountain Wilderness Gallery, which has just opened a new tiger room dedicated to thylacine related art.
We've been fortunate enough to be invited into the Cradle Mountain Hotel Wilderness Gallery Tiger Room. It's a great example where Tasmanian local artists have been able to demonstrate their talents with the particular thylacine bent. On my left here, we've got a cabinet of thylacine related artwork. In particular, we're going to have a look at the faux thylacine skins. Now these are skins that have been created by a Tasmanian artist named David Hurst to replicate a genuine thylacine skin.
This is the thylacine footage held by the National Archive of some of the last thylacines in captivity at the Beaumont Zoo in Hobart. And it never ceases to blow me away that the extinction of this animal is so recent that we have film footage of it. It's an extraordinary animal. As you can see, in captivity it seems to end up being quite conditioned to the environment. But the one thing that concerns me as a professional animal manager is that some of these animals look very emaciated. I believe that's actually shot at the Smithsonian rather than the Beaumont Zoo, that sequence. You can see here that it's eating the skin and fur off its carcass, which is not dissimilar to how devils and quolls behave. So just by studying this footage over and over and over again, you can extrapolate some information about how these animals may have lived out there in the wilds of Tasmania. This footage gives such an accurate representation of the thylacine that Nick Mooney, whilst he was working for the government and in later years, has used the gaits, the stance, the morphological features of the animal in this footage to analyse some of the sightings and videos that are out there in the general public. That's a real beneficial thing to have, and there's no other cryptid that I can think of that you'd have this genuine footage to compare to. When the comparatively small island of Tasmania becomes more densely populated and its primitive forests are intersected with roads from the eastern to the western coast, the numbers of this singular animal will speedily diminish. Extermination will have its full sway, and it will then, like the wolf in England and Scotland, be recorded to as an animal of the past. John Gould, 1863. This is probably one of the most poignant quotes ever about the thylacine. At that point in time, no one knew anything really about the thylacine. There was no one pushing for its conservation, and an extermination bounty was yet to come. But ultimately, this predicted the extinction of the thylacine in Tasmania.
In the cabinet behind me here, the gallery's got a great collection of thylacine related literature, and it spans a reasonable period. So some dating back to the 60s and some literally released in the last year or so. People who are interested in thylacine, there's lots of written material out there for you to investigate. Chris, I think the Wilderness Gallery's done a fantastic job in combining science and art together and conveying important information about the thylacine.
Absolutely, I love the breakdown of these signs, and ultimately interpret for thylacine can be very difficult because we're drawing from personal experience and anecdotes and bounties rather than scientific fact written down in peer review articles as we would these days. But the breakdown of these signs is really good for me, like general overview, human impact, and it's undeniable the impact that we as humans have had on this species. Bounties that sort of put them in that vulnerable position, ecology, and that's the difficult one. What niche did the thylacine fill? We can extrapolate from the videos and skull morphology and things like that, but we don't, in my opinion, know 100% what this animal did out there. And then from there, trappers and snarers, and as we saw from Yakandanda Hut and Charleston Hut, trappers and snarers were a big part of the sort of the makeup of Tasmania. Yep. I think they've done an exceptional job to sort of tie between the artwork and the sort of historic photos and the information we do have.
Yeah, look, for me it's really well worth a visit to this particular gallery and the Tiger Room in particular.
Absolutely. And the burgers from the bar, double thumbs up.
Yeah, double thumbs up to die for. If you get the opportunity, come and visit.
Yeah, if you're in the Cradle Mountain area, make sure the Tiger Room at the Wilderness Gallery is on your list of things to do, guys.